Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR 96.3, 96.3 HD2, and Sirius XM Channel 141. I'm Bramante Bryant in for Harold Fisher. This is the Insight segment. Well, we are taking a hard look tonight at unsportsmanlike conduct, especially in college football. As we all know, college football is a game steeped in tradition, passion, fierce rivalries, bringing together communities, igniting school spirit, and creating unforgettable moments on and off the field. But in recent weeks, we have witnessed a troubling uptick in brawls and unsportsmanlike behavior. What is driving this surge? And are the fines and punishments enough to put a stop to it? We're talking about that tonight. And joining me for this important conversation is Kelsey Nicole Nelson, an award-winning sports journalist, and Martin McNair, founder of the Jordan McNair Foundation. Thank you both for being with us. As usual, glad to have you back.
Yep. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Excited for this conversation.
Yep.
Kelsey, I'm going to start with you. Let's start from one of these big issues that's going on over this past weekend, the Ohio State-Michigan game. Now, this isn't the only place where this has happened with this sort of flag sort of mounting thing in the middle of the field. Michigan comes into Ohio State, upsets the Buckeyes. Michigan takes its school flag and wants to plant it right in the middle of the big O in the middle of the field. Ohio State players weren't having it. A brawl ensues. Michigan police and some county police in Ohio pepper spray some of the players on the field. I mean, it just turned into a mess. And this is just one of a few. I think there was another brawl, like a Jackson State and Alabama State. I don't know if pepper spray was used in that instance, but I think it happened in another game. Might have been Florida FSU. But what say you about what's happening here, especially in college football? What's your sense of what's going on?
My gosh, Vermonte, I think you hit the nail on the head. It was a crazy weekend in college football, right? Most of us, we love our college football Saturdays. We're excited to watch those rivalry matchups. I think that was such a great way to end the season, right, for college football. You think about the ratings and the way that college football is continuing to project at a time when leagues like the NBA, Vermonte, are actually seeing decrease ratings, right? So it feels like college football is in the right trajectory. But I was watching, as somebody who graduated from a Big Ten school and who loves Big Ten football, I've covered Big Ten football. It was a little bit appalling, but at the same time, this is why we love our sports, right? We wear our schools. You wear your paraphernalia, you wear your school colors all the time. Look, I went to Maryland. The Maryland state flag is probably the most proud flag that is out there. I would say, we rock it probably like anybody else. And, I think the players feel that, right? They knew how big of a game that this was. Every media pundit was pretty much talking about this game if you cover college football, even if you don't, right? Everybody knew that this game was going on, and you never want to see fights, happen. But at the same time, I mean, sports are a form of entertainment. To quote the first Gladiator, are you not entertained at what we saw? We saw about 8 fights this weekend, Vermonte. So for me, it was like, I mean, obviously I'm big on respect, right? But I want you to stand on business in the football game, not after the game, right? That's where you put the work into the game. And I think the use of pepper spray too is a whole separate conversation. Was not a fan of that, Vermonte, at all. I think that could have been de-escalated in a plethora of other ways before pepper spray was used as a last resort. And again, that's a whole conversation. There's legalities and there's so many different things involved in that. But I think at the end of the day, emotions run high, right? These are young guys. We're living in an era where college football players have their own agency, right? Every game means something, whether it's your NIL deal, whether it's your sponsorships, right? A lot of those NIL deals are year to year. We're living in a college, transfer portal era where it's crazy, right? As a broadcaster, you look at all these different schools now that these guys go to. So I think it was a mix of emotions, but at the same time, I wasn't mad at it. I'm honestly not opposed to banning flag planting. Like, again, I think guys need to have fun, right? You want to keep this fun, but at the same time, it should never be that reaction, because at the end of the day, we want to keep these players safe, right? That's why the NCAA was created. And respect is a big thing in sports, right? You never want to be disrespected, especially on your home turf. So hated to see it. But again, I don't think the flag planting should have gotten Vermonte to that point.
Martin, part of your foundation or basically your foundation is based on making sure college players, are safe. You lost your son a few years ago in a situation where it was a sort of an internal team thing in terms of keeping him safe. But I'm sure your foundation deals with, all levels of making sure college players are safe. Sportsmanship comes into that. How do you see this issue, from a broader standpoint? I use the flag planting thing because, you then have law enforcement that has to get involved on the field and pepper spraying players. What's your sense of this? Is it just kind of like, this is kind of, boys will be boys kind of thing, or
Well,
is it more than that?
well, Bramante, I agree with what Kelsey said, but one of the main things. So before we settled at committed to Maryland, Jordan was highly recruited, right? And Ohio State offered Jordan a scholarship in the 9th grade, which just kind of didn't mean a whole lot, but they showed interest. And I remember Jordan had, and I tell this story often, and I remember Jordan was like, "Dad, they wanted us to come to Ohio State." And this weekend was just like, we got to come this weekend, right? So we went up and they did this whole Jesus Shuttlesworth thing and all this type of stuff. Anybody that knows sports, right? But one of the main things, the only thing, and as a parent, you get so mesmerized by all the championship rings and the football building and the case and everything like that. But in regards to what the assignment was for the student athlete or the football player was one thing: beat the team up north. That was it. That is that right. They didn't acknowledge Michigan. I'm like, well, who's the team up north? But I later figured that out. That was the number one thing: beat the team up north. Now, if you beat the team up north, you get a gold chain and all these tangible gifts that make sense to an 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old. That was it. That was the only thing. That was one of the main things. And Coach Urban Meyer was there at the time. And, he shared some other information from us. But at the end of the day, they planted that seed from the very first visit. Just beat them. So now we all know that this is a rivalry weekend, right? And we already know that may be one of the bigger college games per year. And again, your rival, you have to have a certain level of hate. I hate to use the term hate loosely. You got to have a certain level of disdain for your rival because they planted that even on a visit. So again, that's all you got to do. Beat the team up north. That's it. So again, I'm sure that's planted year after year after year after year after year. And if we get beat, I think they won by 3 points, Kelsey?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So of course we already got beat in home. Yeah, we're salty, So again, not to say boys will be boys, and then you're gonna plant a flag. Every out of the 3 teams that had brawls, all of it was behind flag planting.
Mm-hmm.
One of the coach at Florida, he even snatched the flag off the field the other day. The coach did. So now, if our leader or our example of
Sportsmanship.
sportsmanship does it, this is just who we are. So, but to answer your question, I think that from one of the big things for us, Bramante, was, I always thought that basically it would have been a scenario if it had just been a cold water tub on the field that day, I wouldn't be on your show talking about this right now. I used to think like that. And then what I started as we evolved as a foundation, and one of the things that I started realizing was, yeah, a cold water tub or a piece of safety equipment without a practice emergency action plan is your foundation for everything, not just on the field injuries, but on the field policing, on the field safety. So a lot of times when we look at safety, now we're looking at, okay, wow, did the authorities have to really come in and pepper spray? But at the end of the day, again, this is what it really looks like when things get bad, and you will want somebody to have some type of system in place, because a lot of times, like our space, we deal with the youth level, we deal with, pretty much like we call it the wild, wild west, but still, you still got to know where the police, when we do an emergency action plan, we got to know where the, 3 or 4 things. I mean, we do about 5 to 7 things, but you always got to know where the closest police station is, the closest fire station, the closest hospital, because again, not only are we protecting kids, but again, we're going to get some irate parents as well. So we got to be in a position to deal with them as well, or be prepared to deal with them as well, or be prepared to have an event of mindset that anything could pop off, in layman's terms, and we need to be prepared for it, even a brawl. Yep.
All right. So I'm going to push back just a little bit.
Mhm.
And Kelsey, I'm going to push back a little bit on the flag planting thing, right? And I've
Mhm.
heard the conversation like, hey, this is what, as you had mentioned, this is what college football is all about. This is what the rivalries are about. And I'm thinking in terms kind of the sportsmanship thing and how this has kind of, to me, sort of gone beyond like, okay, I mean, I know really what it's saying is like, in war, we've taken over territory and we're planting the flag on the island and it's ours. You and I know that in these games, the games are over. I don't care what gender it is. Emotions are high. A lot of stuff is going on. And to me, it would seem like that's almost a bridge too far. Do your thing in the game, get off the field, shake hands, because the way I see it, it's going to get to the point where they're just going to have the two teams just go right in the locker room. It may be old school. I remember Joe Gibbs. I mean, this wasn't because of fights, but he would never really go to the middle of the field and shake hands. He'd always wave and then go right to the locker room. And I feel like that's kind of what's going to happen, especially when you're dealing with younger people. I think that would be my pushback, where I think like that flag planting thing kind of is a big deal because it's a level up beyond, don't be celebrating in the end zone on my field when you. So am I just like get off of my lawn kind of old
The old
man?
man
Is
Vermonte,
that
is
what
that
I'm
what we
sounding
sound
like?
like on the show right
I
now?
sure, I sure I am, but hey, I'll
No.
take it.
I completely hear your pushback point. I think this is the problem. Therein lies the problem, right? So I cover a lot of games and I talk to a lot of coaches. And the thing that unites all coaches is what are they looking for in players, right? That dog, right? You want that fire, that passion. That's what you want in a player. This is, like you said, either gender. That's what everybody wants, right? And so I think when you ask for that and you're asking somebody to literally channel in 100% of their energy into that game, Marty, you hit the nail on the head, that rivalry, right? I mean, all of us have in connection Maryland, right? I've hated Duke since I was born, being born and bred in Maryland, right? I still hate Duke till this day. This is since 92. It's been inbred in me, right? And I feel the type of way. I think we're asking a lot of the players, right? And this is, again, not to say that we want them to fight, right? I mean, every week in the NFL, we're seeing fights between fans with those rivalry games, right? I mean, emotions run high whether you're young or old, Bermonte, in sports, right? Because sports ignite a whole different side of us. Like, we really feel passionate about it. I think with sports, it becomes personal. And then with rivalries, it even becomes more personal, right? Because I think Marty said it too. It's a badge of honor. Like, for here in the Maryland area, to be a real Baltimore Ravens, the players will tell you, you have to beat Pittsburgh. Like, that's the way you become a Baltimore Raven. That's the way you play like a Raven. I think, in this rivalry, Michigan has owned now Ohio State. Ohio State had a chance to do something spectacular, right? It was a close game and it came down to kickers. And we've been having a whole conversation now, right, on the importance of field goal kickers. But I hear you. Like, we want the players to stay safe. I know the NCAA will make a rule about this. They already do have that sportsmanship push, right? This is a thing. This year, when you look into this season, the two things the NCAA was focusing on, one was targeting, Vermonte. That was the big thing the NCAA was focused on going into college football, targeting. We're also seeing this in the National Football League. Sportsmanship was the second part of that, right? Like, how do we keep the guys, like, making sure that they respect each other? Because again, at the end of the day, it's a football game, right? It's enjoyable entertainment. Yes, these kids are on scholarships, and student athletes, but again, you never want it to go beyond that because they're representing their university, they're representing their families, and they're representing themselves. But again, I think when you're putting, somebody, as we call football, organized chaos, I just think it's hard to be like, play hard and play tough and be as mean as you can to the other side. But at the end of the game, sit down and put your hands in your lap and just smile with defeat. I think that's a lot to ask of anybody. So I say that to say, I think even if you send the guys back, I mean, for the guys that are returning to these teams, right? If I'm Ohio State, I'm taking it personal. And next year, when that comes, I'm going to remember everything that happened. And of course, you hope that fuels into a win. And let's be honest, this creates storylines. This got more viewership. Folks that didn't watch the game, they wanted to know what happened. Not really.
I know, Kelsey, but you see though, you're making
You want
you
us to
you
like
you're
just
making okay. No, hold that thought because I got to go to break because I want to come back to that. I want you to jump in on that
yeah.
too, Marty. We're going to take a break. Don't forget, you can hear every edition of the Daily Drum Insight segment via podcast on WHUR.com, or you can download the 96.3 HD2 app on your smartphone and hear the program live in its entirety. This conversation will continue online and on SiriusXM channel 141 and 96.3 HD2. The original Quiet Storm with Raheem Devon is next on 96.3 WHUR. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM Channel 141 and 96.3 HD2. I'm Bramante Bryant in for Harold Fisher, and we are having a spirited conversation on sportsmanship, planting flags in the middle of college football fields. Kelsey Nicole Nelson, she and I are disagreeing on this flag thing. I haven't let Marty jump in yet, but I'm going to pick up on your point. I'm going to let you finish, Kelsey. See, that's my thing. That gets the excitement, that gets the ratings. And here's my counter argument to that. If there is a car accident, we're going to stop and watch it. That gets ratings too. That gets eyeballs. And the reason we have stop signs and stoplights is to stop that. And I just feel like you're going to have to get involved and stop some of this, so you're not so that is not the narrative that becomes the story, not the upset of Michigan coming to Ohio State, Marty, and beating Ohio State 13-10, and Michigan is not ranked. And what was Ohio State ranked? Number 2, Kelsey?
Yeah, right. It's supposed to be an easy game for Ohio State, right?
So that is my thing. I guess I'm just so big on, look, get in the end zone, do your dance. Even this, I don't really like standing over players when you get a big hit, but okay. And we saw some of that in Pee Wee football. But Marty, I'm like, if you don't kind of nip this somewhere in the bud, I just think it's going to go from flag planting, and then you're going to, be in Nebraska. What do they do? What do they run out on the field? What is that? Some kind of cow or something like that with the, you're going to be bringing stuff that you then, bring in the middle of the field. I just feel like it's going to get out of control. And again, to me, once you get into a pepper spray situation, now you can talk about the police not being able to handle themselves, but to me, that says this is ramped up to a level where we don't want this. I'm not really asking you a question. I'm sort of kind of pontificating here, but I just feel like there has to be a limit, I guess, on how much you do that is not involved in the actual 60 minutes of the game. Can college football, can college sports, can that even be policed anymore? Am I asking too much? Or is it what Kelsey is saying? Look, that's whole part of the way it is now. And if you want ratings, you got to kind of have that little extracurricular stuff. I don't want to be misquoting you, but Kelsey, I'm sort of paraphrasing.
All right.
So that's to you, Marty.
Yeah. So Bramante, keep in mind, you're absolutely right. Sensationalism sells. That's just we you name it, sensationalism sells, and that sells tickets. That puts people in the seats. And guess what? I'm sure we probably felt the same way when Penn State. We went to Penn State the other day, and when Locks and James Franklin are longtime rivals, and they had words afterwards, that made the media, right? And really, I think that really you have to. I think now with kids nowadays, the platform. Let me back up. I think that now we live in a world where recently, even in college football, when kids would when a player would score a touchdown, everybody will pull their shirt up like they had a gun, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of coaches stop that, like what it is. But again, this is where did they see this at, right? They saw somebody else do this on social media or something like that. And we've known where in the NFL, right? You've had players that tried to do something on the team's logo, and it always starts a brawl. Whether you plant the flag, whether you disrespecting the team logo or whatever, it always creates a problem. Now, I think that it's so much more at stake with young people now, because any of those guys that had an NIL deal that were caught in those brawls the other day, I'm sure, that probably went out the window, or they probably wouldn't renew the deal, or as a sponsor, I wouldn't want to have this type of behavior represent my brand. So I think those things are conversations that need to be had in regards to behavior on and off the field. However, I think a lot of times, one of the main things, all of us are grown, right? And, we're reasonably thinking people. I think that a lot of times when you can get in a misaligned value mindset, now you're wondering why Derek Chauvin was leaning on George Floyd's neck, and none of his colleagues said, wait a minute, man, that might not be the right thing to do. Because at that moment, we're all caught, and we're all, our values are misaligned. So we're just caught in the moment. So therefore, nobody said, hey, man, you're going to kill this guy. But in reality, when you're in that hyped up situation, guess what? It's one for all and all for one. So if you sit here and you do something we see it every day in sports. I think I was at the Wizards game last night, and I think it wasn't a brawl, but you ain't going to push my teammate but so hard. We see it every day and every week in the NFL. We saw something the other day.
And I don't know, Marty and Kelsey, if that will ever change, right? Because if you see one of your boys or young ladies get hit, the rule is, hey, you've kind of got to back that up. So I'm kind of accepting of that, but I also wonder too, I don't know if you guys saw this or read about this, but in last night's game, Matt LaFleur had talked about some Lions fan had got down on the field and was dealing with the players and giving that, cut your throat sign, and even got up near Matt LaFleur. And he's like, hey, wait a minute, where's security? How did this happen? What's going on? So I think so you've got the fans part of it. I don't even know if you guys think sportsmanship should cover fans, Kelsey. I mean, is that too broad? Or have fans gotten out of control? Because we haven't even gotten into the fact how fans are getting involved in this and kind of also hyping up this, situation.
Well, Barante, I mean, sportsmanship does extend to the fans. I know no one likes to read the small print when you buy those tickets, but there is a way you're expected to act when you do go to games. And what happens if you fight at a game, you're usually kicked out and you can be suspended, right, for the rest of the season. Same with media, right? If media acts up on our credentials, right, we can also be kicked out of games for that reason. I completely hear you, right? It's kind of like we have laws in society, right, Barante? We all know what we're supposed to do. People break laws, right? Every single day. Somebody's breaking a law right now while we're recording the show. So I think you can say the NCAA can do, if it's not flag planting, it's going to be something else, right? I know Baker Mayfield was asked about this because, right, we all remember that 2017 historic campaign that he had when he infamously did it. And Baker Mayfield, one of the biggest names at the time in college football. You can even say we villainize, but we also glorify people who do this, right? Johnny Manziel also asked about this. And think about how big of names those were at the time, even the players involved in this. I'm sure there's a different badge of respect in the locker room for those guys. But I think at the end of the day, I think we're asking a lot, right? I think at the end, like Ryan Day was criticized, right, for how he reacted.
Because he stayed next to the band, I guess, where they played some
really
song after the. First of all, why are they lost the game? I don't even understand why the band is playing the Ohio State song. Then it's like a death march. Why are you even playing that?
That's a whole other thing, right?
Yeah,
right.
That confused me. But to your point, Kelsey, he was criticized.
Because and I would want the coach to do more.
He didn't get out on the field and pull his players off. I think Emmanuel Ocho on Fox really came out and said, look, dude, what are you doing standing on the sidelines? And so, Marty, to Kelsey's point, I'm wondering, too, are coaches allowing a little bit too much of this to the point of where they, as you talked about, look, you get out there on the field. We want you guys to be hyped up. So, hey, do your thing. Don't let them come out here and plant this flag. He didn't say that, but his actions may have said, hey, I'm going to let these guys do what they do because I don't want to make it seem like I'm weak and I'm getting them off the field. And what are the players going to say in the locker room? So I think it almost really gets into a deeper kind of societal thing of like, what are we doing here from the coach's standpoint? Am I overreading Ryan Day's lack of reaction to getting his players off the field and not getting involved in that? Or can they think, I can't allow that? How am I going to go back in the locker room if I let them plant this flag and I tell my players stand back and watch?
Well, I think that coach he might have been upset about the L2. Rest assured now, come on, emotions. Now, it's almost like, one of the things, Bramante and Kelsey, when the riots kicked off in Baltimore City, right? I wanted to go down and riot too because I was angry as well. However, I didn't have no bail money. So it wasn't no need of me going down there because to put myself in that situation, knowing that I couldn't have got out. So what did I have to do? I'd have to, I don't know, vicariously look at everybody else that was brave enough to do that in a sense. Now, I'm not saying that's what coach is doing. However, coach realizes that, you know what, I got to have a job the next day. And what would have been the likelihood of him being effective in the midst of that high tension scenario? He probably wouldn't have, he might have got out there and got hurt himself. Or the last thing you want somebody to do is take a swing at the coach and they hit coach. And now that brawl probably would have lasted, longer than it probably did at that point. So I think that it's not a matter of what, and a lot of times, I think that, we can all, I read something recently. Everybody's job seems easy until it's you that has to do it. So we can all talk about what Baker Mayfield should have done Sunday, or what Lamar Jackson could have done Monday better. We can all Monday morning quarterback, but we ain't the ones out there on the field. So I think that at times, you don't know what you'll do in certain situations other than stay safe yourself.
Kelsey, do you think there is I don't know if I want to say a lack of sportsmanship? Do you think we're seeing less of that?
I don't think we're seeing less of that, honestly. Like I said, emotions ran high. And this weekend, yes, we're going to run with the storyline because it was more fights than we're used to seeing. But I think, again, I think it's funny how society is. Like, one of my favorite football games to watch every year is the backyard brawl, right? And literally, that's what we've primed that game for being. And then in the same sense, we're telling people, hey, but sportsmanship matters. So again, I think society, we send kind of mixed signals, right? I mean,
but can't we have both?
I think we can. I don't think we can just point to this weekend and say, oh, college sportsmanship doesn't exist in college football, right? Like right now, I'm color commentating for women's basketball, Bramante, and there's been no issues at the games, right? So I'm not going to sit here and say it exists in all of sports. I was at the Maryland game, when they beat USC, the fans ran onto the field. There was no brawls, there was no issues, there were no problems.
Yeah, my son was one on the field, by the way.
So he knows that experience, and I'm glad he got that experience.
Yeah, he called me while he was out on the field, so he was.
I love that. But you kind of got to feel a part of it too.
Yeah, vicariously.
But I think, at the end of the day, like people are in fights. Why? Because things happen. As Marty said, things escalate, right? And so I think the NCAA is going to do all they can in their due diligence, right, to try to make the game safer. But fights have existed since the beginning of college football, and they're going to, again, because you're wearing your emotion on your sleeve, right? I mean, and you feel away. And like I said, for me, I want that. I think I would be madder if people just went to the locker room and just didn't care. Like, I think, no offense to the DC sports teams right now, but, people are honestly telling me, hey, Kelsey, I wish the Wizards had some more passion after all these losses that they've had. And that's not to say that's why they're losing.
Another show, Kelsey. You know that. No, and I mean, it's a worthy conversation. I'm actually joking that, oh my God, we could take over the show about the Wizards, couldn't we?
Look, but I'm just saying at the end of the day, Bravante, yes, we can do all we can, right, to have that sportsmanship. But these guys are going into these universities largely because they want to be part of those rivalries, right? I mean, that's why these what's the big storyline before this college football season? Realignment, right? Conference realignment. Like, I mean, universities are trying to get more to the TV deals, and media rights matter, right? And with media rights, you got to put a good product on the field. And I don't think they thought this was going to happen. But again, these guys care about that game. And for me, like I said, the biggest thing was the pepper spray being used. Like if I was a parent, I might have jumped out those stands, Bramante, because ain't no way somebody would that, to my kid. Like I thought that was excessive. But I think, again, the NCAA, why they can do all they can, it's still going to happen. And you don't push that narrative. You just try to keep as safe as possible. But I do kind of counter. I think Ryan Day could have done a lot more. To me, I want a coach that is going to be like, no, I'm not having this. I think the coach, you think about the role of a coach. You think of like me, I'm a professor, right? There are certain things I'm going to allow and not allow. And I make that very clear. I think he had the ability to tell his players, like, get back. I think, Marty, you brought up the Florida State game. I think we saw some of that in that one. Like, I want a coach that can literally, again, be that authority or leader figure on the field. I think that's what makes somebody a leader, right? How you act in times of adversity, how you act in times of crisis and challenge and change. So I think he had the ability to really tell his players, like, look, we lost. We had a chance on the football field. Let's just go back to the locker room. If they want to do an idiotic act or whatever he wanted to call it, let that be on them, right? That's a reflection of them, not on us. Because to your point, then they also became part of that storyline. And again, it just looked like they were more madder after the game and had more energy and more fight after the game than they had in the game. So I think for me, I would have loved the coaches. I know the universities got fined, but that doesn't, for the student athletes, unless they get suspended from a game, that's probably not going to matter as much, right, until next season. But I think when you look at it, the coaches have so much power, right? Like for me, I was never invited in school, not because I was afraid of people, but I was afraid of my parents. I knew what I would have to deal with back home, right? I had that leader, that authority figure back home that I would have to deal with. I think that's what the coaches have the ability to do. Like Mike Tomlin gets praised a lot in football, like, no nonsense type of coach, but that loves his players. And I think his players respect that, for him. I think Ryan Day, again, you lose a big rivalry game, but it could have been so much different, Bramante. I think if he reacted quicker and made sure that his guys were safe, to your point, and got them back to that locker room.
Great point. And you actually bring up something that I was going to ask, Kelsey, and I'll ask you this, Marty, whether or not you think the penalties that are being imposed are sufficient enough to stop some of this. As Kelsey said, Ohio State and Michigan, in this particular game that we're talking about, both of the universities were fined, I think, $100,000. Doesn't necessarily affect the players, but that's a good piece of change.
Yeah.
So do you think the penalties that are coming down are enough, or do you need more needs to be done? Do you need to suspend players? I mean, I think it would be hard to see where a player would be suspended, especially in the Ohio State Michigan situation, but I think it's an institutional kind of thing where these fines are coming down. Is it more appropriate to fine the institutions versus players and coaches? I guess is really what I'm getting at. What are your thoughts there, Marty?
Yeah, I think that in regards to that, most people usually learn from what happened to somebody else, right? You look at our story when, in our story, everybody kind of tightened up because we didn't want to have, and not to say Jordan's scenario was isolated. He was like the 31st kid in 18 years that had died from this type of injury in college football. However, when you look at the scandal that happened at Maryland at that time, so a lot of people really like, all right, we don't want that type of attention here, whatever. So a lot of people really got in front of whatever their bad habits in a sense. So I think that when you impose a significant fine, now look at those two big schools, that $100,000 wasn't but a blink of an eye. That might have, just been some money, a couple pieces, some change they raised on game day that day. I think that when you do sanction, or the NCAA does sanction these schools, that will deter other schools from making these types of same mistakes in a sense. So I do think that those type of, now, should you find the players? No, I don't agree with that. However, I think that systematically you need to find the system or that organization, and therefore, really that type of stuff won't happen, or it'll deter another school preventively from saying, you know what, no, we can't stand that, or we're not going to do that.
Kelsey, when we talk about sportsmanship, or just decorum, which I believe Webster said that was the word of the year, something like that. I think that came out. And it's almost like an oxymoron, especially when you're talking about football, when you're talking about asking for decorum. But we know, especially with young people, social media is their thing. And so a lot of the guidance they may get outside of their parenting is kind of what they see on social media and what they may mimic on social media. What do you think the role of social media is in terms of sports today and the topic that we're talking about? If we're talking about sportsmanship, does social media play some kind of role, you believe?
Oh my gosh, yes. It influences everything, Vermont. I think you hit on it. Like, it's funny you said decorum was the word on Webster. I remember one of the last things that went viral was that TikTok video. What was it? Very very mindful, very demure, right? We were all saying that and joking around.
Or maybe demure. I think demure might have been the word.
Okay.
But it's in the same family, yeah.
Right, and the same thing, and we say that, and we're playful with it. But top shows on TV right now, reality TV shows, and how do you get on a reality TV show? You got to fight. You got to have a storyline, right?
Yes,
you gotta have. So I think, we're living in this. And then honestly, when I'm on social media, if the videos keep scrolling, it's usually some type of fight, right? Some type of negative interaction with people. So I think this is the world that they're growing up in. But Bronte, I do think it's even beyond social media. Like, I think if we're trying to blame that for what we see in sports, let's be honest. If you played basketball, the basketball courts, you saw fights happen. Like, let's just be for real. And they still happen, right? I mean, it's again, it gets high, right? And not saying that, you want it to happen. And I mean, we've seen, unfortunately, actually casualties, right, as well in sports, when emotions run high, and you never want that to be. So I think social media is one part of it. I do think, again, just how society is another part. But again, I go back to the leadership. Again, I think that universities can have and happen. I kind of want to go back to your other point, though, Bramante. I thought the $100,000, why it sounds big, Ohio State and Michigan have very big athletic budgets, right? Very, very big athletic budgets. So I also don't know if 100,000, like the 100,000 would hurt, like, a smaller
Jackson State and like Alabama State when they're born. Right. I got you. Yeah.
But a big university, again, they don't want to pay that, but it's not going to hurt them, as badly. So, I think, again, sportsmanship kind of comes to us, but again, I think it comes to those who are closest to us. Like social media, we can watch anything, and of course you'll see that. But I think if you have the right, for me, like the right caring adults in your life and people who really put value into you kind of walk around. Like for me, respect, trust, integrity, those are very big for me. So in everything I do, I try to make sure that, that plays a line when people like look up my name, right? So that's important to me. And I make sure that people around me are also supportive of that, right? I'm not going to have anybody around me who's just going to start a fight everywhere we go. That's not reflective of me. So I think when we look at sports, again, I think that's why, like when you're looking at a coach, when they're going through those interview processes, Vermonte, you're looking again for a leader of men in that locker room. Like who can own that? Even Mike Locksley example that Marty brought up earlier. For me, even though Maryland lost bad against Penn State, I'm still heartbroken about that game. I was like, oh, at least Mike Locksley showed some fight after and was like, look, I'm not going to have that. I don't care how big of a lead, Penn State had. And I thought, that was great. I think when we think about Mike Locksley and his future, even at Maryland, I thought that was, again, a good display of defending the men behind him. So all that to say, Vermonte, a longer way of saying, like, we can look at social media, but it's going to play even a larger role, right? It's only growing, right? How many new social media sites are there now, right? We have Blue Sky now, we have Threads. Like, there's too many sites, Vermonte, right now that these young people have access to. But at the end of the day, again, we see, I think you can either choose to be what you see in society or choose to be that change that you want to see in society. And for athletes, we want them to know, I always tell every athlete that I interact with, use your platform for a purpose fueled by your passion. What do you want the world to know about you? And especially now with NIL and these sponsorship deals, they really have that power to do it. So again, it's up to individual accolades, but also I think that leadership, and universities can set that precedent. They have the power maybe to kick somebody out, lose that scholarship, right? Or again, whatever they want to do. But, but at the end of the day, they care about winning, right? Because winning brings in dollars. So again, for us, it's just how do we manage pushing sportsmanship, pushing camaraderie, but at the same time, again, trying to make sure that these men become young leaders who can go out into society and hopefully be good examples of what we honestly ask every American citizen to be, Vermonte.
Marty, your foundation, you deal with it all. You deal with parents, you deal with college age kids, you deal with high school kids. I'm not sure if you go all the way down to Pee Wee, but if you're dealing with parents, you're going all the way. But what we see and what we get and what gets mimicked, usually we start at the top, right? And so we've been talking a lot about college sports, but these professional athletes, usually then it trickles down, what college athletes will do. And then, high school athletes will mimic college and professional athletes, but they're mimicking the college athletes who are mimicking the professionals. And then we get into Pee Wee. Again, as I said before we started the show, I was doing some research and I found this TikTok video where this little Pee Wee game, I guess it was the Bills, and they had the Lions helmet on. I don't know if you guys saw that, but these two little players, they didn't look like they were more than maybe 8 or 9. They're kind of tussling, right? And then somebody comes from out of the frame, knocks one of the little guys down. No, I'm sorry, they're tussling, and one of the little guys comes in and pushes one of the other guys down, and then he stands over him and flexes. I'm telling you, I think the little boy couldn't have been more than 7 or 8. And so I asked all of that to then go back up to the top ladder, as though we've been really focusing a lot on college. On the professional level, I think it gets even more dicey because now, you really, really have money involved. I know we have, these NILs where you're paying college athletes, but once you get to professionals, now what they do and what these young people see. And so I guess what I want to know is, are we putting too much of an onus, or am I putting too much of an onus on the professional athletes? That's part one of my question. And then an example I give is, as we know last week with Trevor Lawrence, being hit, the Texans player, right, getting suspended. But then what followed that was the conversation of the bench clearing brawl. Call it what you want. So, Marty, where does professional athletics fall here? How do we judge that in terms of the essence of this conversation, which is about sportsmanship and what can kind of flow from that, from what others see?
And Rod, before Marty answers really
Yeah.
quickly, the other big thing
Mhm.
on social media this year, remember, was Cam Newton getting jumped at his own football.
Yes.
I just wanted to bring
Yes.
that up when we think about a past professional athlete and some people thinking that was okay. And Marty, I would love your thoughts on that.
No,
as
no,
well.
no.
Yeah,
But
no, I'm glad you brought
that's a great point. I'm glad you brought that. I had that in my notes. I wasn't sure if we could get to that.
I'm
but
glad
that's a
you
great
brought that up. Well, first of all, I think that at the professional level, it looks different when you get fined and they taking money out your check. You know what I mean? So, that's a whole nother level. That's more the business side of professional sports, right? I still, and let's keep in mind, really, sports has always been a animalistic type of event, right? From boxing to baseball, they fight in every single sport. I've never seen fighting in the WNBA, but let a player get hit, let a pitcher hit a player on the mound, right, or a batter. They fighting. As simple as that, and the whole team will stand behind their teammates. So, but again, Romante, when you talk about talk about Pee Wee and youth sports, that's taught at an early age. That is taught at an early age. One of the main things that, when I look back at Jordan, right, I always wanted Jordan to be this. I wanted Jordan to be an aggressive, a dog of a player at 10 years old, right? Because he was big. He was bigger than everybody else. But I just dawned on me when I was telling somebody else this not too long ago. I was at a high school game and was talking to somebody. What did he have to be angry about? He wasn't missing no meals. He had the lights on. He could go, like he had a PlayStation. So, I mean, life is good. There's nothing to be angry about. I tell parents all the time, just keep your kid active. That light switch of aggression will go off. And I mean, just being aggressive on the field or aggressive on the court or aggressive in their sport. Keep them involved. It'll go off. I wanted it to go off at 10. It didn't go off for Jordan until 15. Right now, keep in mind, you have to have a level of aggression to play any sport successfully. You got to be tough. You got to be tough mentally. You got to be tough physically. So again, all of this goes in sync with that. We're not telling kids, we're not sending kids through anger management classes, because at the end of the day, we want you to produce a certain result on Saturdays, Fridays, Saturdays, or Sundays, flat out. Nobody's saying, oh, you shouldn't go out there and do this. No, you're going out there and telling your kids or your student athlete or your team, do whatever it takes for us to get the objective is to win. Do whatever you got to do, whatever mindset you have to be in. However, I just think sports is one of those sports where, the crazier guy thinks that he is, this goes well with his teammates and all that stuff unrealistically. But I think that, as I said, from the NFL's perspective, yeah, that's a little different because that's a business aspect. And then you even had a commercial I was watching recently where the family was there and the kid was doing everything that he saw on Sunday TV, an NFL player do, because this is who we look at. And again, I just think from an overall perspective, and I don't want to digress here, but remember when Meta World Peace and all of those guys got to fight the people in the stands? These are animalistic behaviors. This is the one thing that brings all of us together. So if we live the most easy, calm lives, but when we get to a game, guess what? We can let it all loose right there to the best of our ability.
And that's such a great example because a whole documentary was done on that. There is so much more I want to talk about, but the clock is ticking. And I really, too, wanted to get into that Cam Newton a little bit more, Kelsey. But, we'll be back again and I'm sure these things will pop up again and we'll do a part 2 conversation. Kelsey Nicole Nelson, thank you so much for being with us, award-winning journalist. Marty McNair with the McNair Foundation. Marty, if folks want to get more information about the foundation, how can they do so?
Yeah, please follow us at the go to social media, Instagram. We aren't on blue sky yet, but yeah, follow us on Jordan McNair Foundation on Instagram, follow us at the JordanMcNairFoundation.org. And you can pretty much see everything that we're up to, and we always stay up to something. Like our goal is to make a difference and keeping student athletes safe.
And Kelsey, if folks want to follow you, how can they do so?
Yeah, my website's the easiest way, KelseyNicoleNelson.com, and on social media, The Real K Nelson. So thank you so much, Bramante, and go Terps. Love this.
Yes. We've got really 3 Terps on the air, so it's Terp Nation tonight. All right, thank you guys. Appreciate it as always. That's the Daily Drum for this Friday, December 6th. I'm Bramante Bryant in for Harold Fisher. Have a great night and a fantastic weekend.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Marty. Thank you, Kelsey.
Thank
Let me end this recording.